the 1980s, the community of Eugene, Oregon, were baffled and horrified by a string of murders of several women. At the time, they didn't know that it would take nearly 4 decades to find who the monster was that took their lives. On June 5, 1986, the body of 62-year-old Gladys May Hensley was found lying on the floor of her apartment in Eugene. Her apartment showed signs of forced entry, and there was evidence of a sexual assault. 2 weeks later, the body of 33-year-old Janice Marie Dickinson was found beneath a tree behind a car dealership's parking lot. Her murder was sexually motivated as well. Detectives believed that the cases were related, but had no clues that could lead to a potential suspect. While police were investigating the 2 women's murders, a man was arrested for attempting to burglarize a woman's apartment in Springfield in the middle of the night named John Bolsinger. According to the woman, she had heard her dog barking and went to go check, only to find him peering through her kitchen window. She ran towards the living room and called police, and while she was still on the phone, Bolsinger entered the house and attempted to yank the phone from her hands. The woman then started attacking him with the phone and flashlight, causing him to cower to the kitchen and flee, leaving behind a vest and a kitchen knife. A sketch was soon released of him in March 1988. Not long after, Bolsinger was arrested and interrogated about the crime, during which he claimed that he had simply knocked on the door and walked away, but as a result of amnesia, could not remember anything after this point. He was subsequently found guilty and given a 5-year prison term. He remained at the Utah State Prison until December 8, 1987, when he was paroled for good behavior, despite already having an extensive criminal record. In 1980, he was arrested for murdering 33-year-old Casey Sorensen in her home at 8044 West 3500 South in Salt Lake City, Utah. Bolsinger claimed that he and the victim were having consensual sex that accidentally led to her death, causing him to panic and flee. At the murder trial itself, the main focus was to determine whether Bolsinger had strangled Casey intentionally or accidentally. To support their claims that it was accidental, defense attorneys brought in testimony from Dr. Boyd Stevens, a San Francisco-based coroner, who said that the woman's death was the result of heart failure caused by compression on her chest. District Attorney Lynn Payne countered the claim by saying that Bolsinger had strangled her after she allegedly insulted him. A judge sentenced Bolsinger to only 5 years in prison once again, and he was released on parole on March 7, 1986. Bolsinger was paroled to his hometown of Springfield, Oregon, just 3 months before Gladys Hensley was killed. On February 27, 1988, 3 months after his second release from prison, Bolsinger broke into the home of 73-year-old Geraldine Spencer Toohey and murdered her. Geraldine was found the next day by her sister. On March 23, 1988, Bolsinger committed suicide at his home in Springfield less than a month after killing Geraldine. At the time, police only knew that he had a history of breaking and entering and that he had taken his own life. He wasn't even a suspect of the murders of Geraldine, Gladys, and Janis. It wouldn't be until the year 2000 that DNA connected the murders of Geraldine, Gladys, and Janis to the same killer. But police still didn't know who the DNA belonged to at the time, and their cases would go cold until 2016. It was then that the Eugene Police Department contacted Parabon Nanolabs, who created a snapshot of the suspect based on DNA extracted from the crime scenes. They received more than 100 tips, but none of them panned out. Over the next few years, police investigated all possible suspects, eventually narrowing it down to 4 people, one of whom was Bolsinger. After extensive investigations, they excluded the other suspects via footprints and fingerprints. In February 2022, after 6 years of extensive DNA testing and genealogy research, the Eugene Police Department announced at a press conference that John Charles Bolsinger was identified as the killer of the 3 women and that the cases are now officially closed. Janice Rose Bullock, known as Jan, was born in August of 1950. As an adult, she was living in Pearl River County, Mississippi, had 4 daughters, and was going through a divorce. She would end up losing custody of her children to their father in 1974 when she failed to show up for a court hearing regarding the divorce. After this, she never saw her 4 children again. Her family last heard from her when they got a letter from her sometime in 1976. On May 28, 1977, she was personally served in Pearl River County, Mississippi, with a summons to appear in court in regards to the custody case. Jan was reportedly working as a waitress at the Dickey's truck stop on Highway 26 in Poplarville, Mississippi. Indications are that she continued to work there until early to mid-1978. After leaving the county in 1978, she apparently worked at various locations on the Gulf Coast, and then she disappeared. The circumstances of her disappearance are unclear, but there was no indication of her whereabouts since 1978 until recently when she was shockingly found alive in a Fort Worth, Texas nursing home. For unclear reasons, Jan wasn't reported missing until 2017 when one of her daughters filed the report. Her 4 daughters had been searching for answers for years and submitted DNA in an attempt to find her. In December 2021, investigators discovered that Jan was working in the Raceland area of Lafourche Parish, Louisiana, in the late 70s or early 80s at a place called Dupe's Bar. In January 2022, Mississippi Coast Crime Stoppers asked the public's help to locate Jan, and someone contacted investigators about her late husband, which led to a possible son living in Texas. Her son, David Streety, was located in Texas, and authorities met with him on February 12, 2022. They looked through family photos and possessions, which led them to believe Jan had been living under an alias since 1980. He told them his mother was in a nursing home in Fort Worth, and her true identity was confirmed the next day. It has not yet been announced what alias she has been using for the past 40 years. David says he was adopted by his parents from Charity Hospital in New Orleans right after his birth. He says his mom told him she had no living family when questioned about relatives. Despite his shock and anger, David says he still loves his mom. He says Jan and her late husband gave him a good life, and he had a great mother, but is now looking to find his birth family. He added that he never had an idea they were not his biological parents, and even wonders if he was possibly kidnapped. He is also interested in meeting Jan's 4 biological children that she abandoned before allegedly purchasing or kidnapping David. He was told that Jan and her husband purchased him for $1,000 from his biological parents and raised him as their own. He now doesn't know if that is true, and he can't find any records of being adopted. He says his plan is to send his DNA to 23andMe and see what happens. After some speculation that Jan must have left her husband due to abuse, his daughters Mindy and Mary Beth posted on Facebook that their father, although not perfect, was never abusive to his children and raised all of them the best he could, and he remained supportive of them. Lynette Ladner, who is one of Jan's 4 biological daughters, said she has spoken with her mother and thanked Detective Mark Ogden for his hard work to bring this case to a close. She declined to elaborate further, only saying that her mother is ill. Authorities are looking to speak to anyone that knew Jan anytime after the late 70s or early 80s, especially in and around Lafourche Parish, Louisiana. This will definitely be a case to continue following for updates. From December 2005 to February 2006 in Volusia County, Florida, authorities believed they had a serial killer on the loose and dubbed him the Daytona Beach Killer. 3 women were all found shot and left throughout secluded areas of Daytona during that 2-month period of time, and then 2 more afterwards. All but one of the women had a history of prostitution, were unclothed, and had been killed the same way. On Christmas Eve 2005, 45-year-old Laquetta Gunther and her friend Stacy Dittmer made plans to cook Christmas dinner together. However, Laquetta had left the apartment that day and never returned. The next morning, on Christmas Day, Stacy went searching for her friend. At some point, she noticed some police investigating something in an alley on Beach Street. She would later find out that they were investigating the death of her friend Laquetta, who had been killed and left wedged between two buildings in a filthy alley. After her death, Stacy put together a poster signed by her friends to hang in the alley, and ironically, one of those signatures belonged to the killer's next victim, Julie Green. Julie Green was 35 years old when she was found on January 14, 2006, on the edge of a construction zone at what is now the Bayberry Lake subdivision off LPGA Boulevard. Julie often hung out at a popular bar in the area called Willie's Place on Madison Avenue, just like Laquetta. On February 24, 2006, there was another victim, 35-year-old Iwana Patton. She was found near Mason and Williamson Avenues. At the time, it was a wooded, undeveloped area, but now it is an entrance to the Daytona Beach Police Department's headquarters. Iwana worked as a nursing assistant and lived in the Holly Hill area. Nearly a year later, 30-year-old Stacy Gage was found in a wooded area off Hancock Boulevard. Stacy was a mother of two, and although unlike the others, she had no history of sex work, but her murder was similar in nature to the other three. Police do not have DNA or ballistics evidence from her case to tie her death to the others, but investigators have said due to the similarities, they believed she is definitely linked. Years later, on March 7, 2016, 32-year-old Rachel Bay was found just off the Beeline Highway, about a mile north of Indiantown Road in Palm Beach County. No clothing or identification was found near her. Unlike the other three women, Rachel had been strangled to death, and the same DNA was found during autopsy. Using the suspect's DNA profile, genetic genealogists were able to determine who the DNA most likely belonged to and gave his name to investigators. Those investigators then watched the suspect and were able to collect a cigarette he had discarded while waiting on a bus near his home. The DNA was a match to the killer and belonged to Robert Tyrone Hayes. He was a student at Bethune-Cookman University at the time of the slayings and lived on North Flagler Drive in West Palm Beach. He had also worked at the university in the past and at one point held a security officer's license. His home is less than a mile from where Rachel's body was found, and her cell phone pinged near his home for days after her death. He also lived in the area where Julie, Laquetta, and Iwana were last seen before their deaths. According to records, he has also lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, Riviera Beach, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, and Daytona Beach, Florida. Hayes was questioned twice by investigators during the initial investigation into the Daytona Beach murders because he owned a .40 caliber gun. He bought the gun in early December 2005, not long before Laquetta was shot on Christmas Eve. In March 2006, Hayes told police he had given the gun to his mother, but during his trial, she denied this ever occurred. Police said Hayes also reported a .40 caliber firearm as being stolen from his vehicle in Riviera Beach in December 2006. In 2019, Hayes was arrested for the murder of Rachel Elizabeth Bay. DNA found on her body matched DNA from Julie and Laquetta, and ballistics tests connected him to Iwana's murder. On February 22, 2022, Hayes was found guilty of murdering Laquetta, Julie, and Iwana and will be tried separate for the murder of Rachel Bay. Thankfully, Hayes is behind bars where he belongs and will no longer be able to prey on women. Mary Catherine Edwards was born July 9, 1963, to Lum and Mary Ann. In 1995, at the age of 31, she was a beloved and vibrant second-grade teacher living alone in Beaumont, Texas. She had a large circle of friends and a close-knit family and had just moved into a townhouse at 1005 Park Meadow Drive. She was last seen on the evening of Friday, January 13, 1995. After work that day, she arrived home, walked her dog, had a glass of wine, and talked to her boyfriend. However, the next day, her parents grew concerned when she did not respond to any phone calls. They went to her home to check on her, and her father was shocked when he found her in her bathroom. She had been murdered and sexually assaulted. Over the next 26 years, Beaumont police investigators partnered with the Texas Rangers, FBI, and the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office to follow up on tips. In April 2020, investigators began using genetic genealogy to help find a suspect. There was remaining evidence from the crime, and several items were sent to Othram, where scientists eventually developed a DNA extract that was suitable for advanced DNA testing. The DNA was entered into GEDmatch, and second cousins were identified. The Texas Rangers Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program worked with Beaumont police, led the investigation and creation of family trees, and the searching of public records to identify the unknown male from the crime scene. As additional distant family members were discovered, further DNA samples were taken, leading to more than 30 DNA files being voluntarily submitted. With DNA connections from both the paternal and maternal sides of the unknown suspect, he was finally identified as 61-year-old Clayton Bernard Foreman. However, investigators needed Foreman's DNA to finalize the connection and started collecting trash from Foreman's home in an attempt to collect his DNA. When they finally had a sample, it positively matched the DNA found on Mary Catherine's body and the handcuffs at the scene. He was then arrested, and in September of 2021, he was indicted for the capital murder of Mary Catherine. Foreman, who was living in Reynoldsburg, Ohio, when he became a suspect, was a former high school classmate of Mary Catherine's, and they were considered to be casual friends at the time of her murder. They both attended the same high school, and she was even a bridesmaid at the wedding of Foreman and his first wife. Additionally, investigators say that the crime against Mary Catherine had similarities to a 1981 sexual assault in Jefferson County of another of Foreman's former high school classmates. In July 1981, he came across a stranded woman at a gas station in the pouring rain and saw that her car was stuck. He offered her a ride home and gained her trust by lying and telling her that he was a police officer. Once in the car, they drove away, and he later stopped the car, bound her hands, same as Mary Catherine, and then sexually assaulted her while holding a knife to her. Foreman, a no-good waste of space, pleaded guilty to the crime and only received 3 years of probation. 14 years later, he would murder Mary Catherine, and there's no telling how many other sexual assaults or even murders he committed over the years. Shockingly, former classmates of his stated that he helped organize the Forest Park High School reunions and attended the last one in 2018. He was even in charge of the reunion tributes to former classmates who had died. Jarral Ray Osburn, who went by JR, sadly went missing at the age of 35. In 2012, he worked for Spirit Aerosystems and lived alone in an RV park at 209th West Avenue in Sand Springs, Oklahoma. He was last seen at the Walgreens Pharmacy in Owasso, Oklahoma at 5:35 p.m. on August 28, 2012. The next morning, his blue 1994 Oldsmobile Cutlass was found locked and abandoned in the roadway near Cincinnati Avenue and East 63rd Street in Tulsa. It was towed, but no evidence of foul play was discovered. Records show that his cell phone was used through the early morning hours of August 29, 2012, after which all activity stopped. This is the same day his car was found. Although he had previously struggled with drugs, he had been clean for 2 years by the time of his disappearance, and his family never believed he would have abandoned them. Investigators at the time believed he had possibly met with foul play. He would go missing for the next 10 years until a man was hiking near Oak Cliff Drive on February 15, 2022, and discovered human remains in the remote area. The remains have been identified as JR's, but the cause and manner of death have not yet been released. His body was located not far from where his car had been found when he went missing. Oak Cliff Drive, the area where his body was found, is an offshoot of Cincinnati Avenue in a wooded area north of 66th Street North. Detectives are relieved to finally be able to return Jarral to his family and will continue the investigation to try and determine what led to his untimely death.